Welcome to Spotlight on Seniors. My name is Steve Raymond. We're coming to you today from beautiful Newcastle, Maine on the shores of the Damariscotta River. Today I am very, very happy to have Paul Kando as my guest. Paul Kando, I would describe him as the Midcoast renewable energy sage. He has been doing research in renewables energy since the early 1970s. He's the founder of the Midcoast Green Collaborative. He is the writer, columnist for the very popular Energy Matters in the Lincoln County News. Paul will be speaking today about renewable energy in our state, and there's so much to discuss with this man that we've actually decided to do two shows. We're going to talk right now about a larger overview, the meta perspective on Maine Maine energy policy, how it affects our economics here, what's doable, how do we compare to our neighboring states and other northern climate countries, seeing what's possible for us. In the second part of the show, we're going to talk closer in about your individual home and things that can be done to improve the energy efficiency of your home, as well as working in research and application. Paul himself owns 2 solar homes. He's done, I would imagine, countless energy audits over the years. So he has not just an overview perspective, but he has a very personal perspective on energy efficient homes. Paul, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here.
Good to be here.
So Paul, in our overview discussion now, does Maine have a comprehensive energy policy taking us into the future?
No, Maine doesn't have one, and this is one of the problems.
Okay.
Because what happens is various interests propose various laws, and they either pass or they don't, or they get vetoed, but it's always nickeling and diming, one played against the other and without context. So
okay.
it's a huge problem.
Climate change is a very political discussion. I have my feelings about it, and I know, of course, you're a very strong advocate for taking measures to thwart climate change. And many of us, and I include myself in that, believe that climate change is the greatest issue facing our species, really.
Yeah, because if we don't deal with it, the rest of it doesn't matter, but that's...
That's right.
Yeah.
So, if we acknowledge that, and is it possible to have a reasonable discussion about solar energy that is totally separate from the climate change discussion? Is solar energy good for Maine, even separate from climate change considerations? That's the question.
Well, of course. I mean, to begin with, we are now spending, in round numbers, about $6 billion a year on fossil fuels.
Yes.
All of which leaves the Maine economy. And
why do you say that? What does that mean? $6 billion leaves the Maine
$6
economy?
billion because we don't produce any fossil fuels.
Right.
So whatever we buy it from people outside the state, whether it's outside the country or just in other states or Canada, doesn't matter.
Yes.
That money leaves the Maine economy. And that's a huge amount of money. So we need to, that is reason alone why we should look at alternatives to that.
Right.
And we have basically 2 major alternatives. One is wind and the other one is solar. Solar has the advantage that it's distributed, and it fits into even the current grid configuration, although the current grid needs a lot of doctoring, but it does fit. And another advantage of it is that my solar system actually benefits everybody else on the grid as well. And that has been documented by various researchers. So absolutely, solar can be discussed on its own merit and should be discussed on its own merit.
So for our conversation today, let's do that. And when you said my solar, you meant any particular homeowner who has solar.
Right.
It benefits the grid. So that leads us into a few different kinds of areas. One of them is net metering. Can you tell us what that means and how that's working in our state?
Okay. My solar panels generate power. Whatever power they generate, it first goes to meet my current needs. My refrigerator is running, my air conditioner, my computer, etc., etc. That's the first thing, the real-time needs. What is left over goes through a second meter, supposedly into the grid.
Right.
Now, the physics of it is that in reality, it doesn't go into the large grid. What it does, it goes to meet the next nearest need. So the current needs of, let's say, my next door neighbor, etc. But since it left my house through that meter, I'm getting credit for that from the utility, which basically amounts to a credit against my electric bill.
Yes. Now, so you're in essence selling power back to the power company.
Sort of.
Sort of.
Sort of. There are limits. In other words, I get credited for the retail value of my power, but not the delivery charges, which is a significant, okay?
Right.
And since I obviously, like right now, when there's a lot of sunshine, I can't possibly use that up this month, so obviously I will accumulate credits. And so the way the rules are set up in Maine is that my credits, I have a right to use them up over a whole calendar year. In other words, this month's credits will be good until next month's credits.
Right.
Theoretically, I would give it away if I didn't use it by that point.
No.
Does
Yes.
it make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense, yeah. So I want to come back to the comprehensive policy, but one more question on this. The opponents of solar energy have made the argument that net metering deprives the utilities of needed revenue to maintain the overall grid, and that effect that solar user is not contributing their fair share. Is that a reasonable argument?
It is not, simply because it's not based on fact.
Please say.
It is true that I don't contribute directly when I generate solar. I am not spending extra money an extra fee to generate, to take care of the grid. On the other hand, every single kilowatt hour that I produced with solar power yields 10.9 cents a kilowatt hour advantage. In other words, and this was based on a study that the Maine Public Utilities Commission commissioned in 2015, which shows that the value of each solar kilowatt hour is more than twice the current retail rate, which means that each kilowatt hour I generate benefits the grid and therefore everybody else,
Right.
part of it, at the rate, as it turns out, to be 10.9 cents.
Right. Right. I read that.
That's more than what it costs to maintain the grid.
More than
my
what it
share.
costs to maintain the grid, the value of the solar power that you create, and it comes back onto the grid.
Right. In other words, more than my share.
More than
obviously.
your share,
Yeah, yeah.
yes. Right, right.
So it's a net gain. And this has been demonstrated in lots of places around the world, so it's not just...
Right. And the Maine Public Utilities Commission report, which I read the executive summary, a lot of it was very technical, but that came out in that report, the value of solar power and defining that. Yes.
Right.
Okay. Let's come back up a little bit higher again to the comprehensive plan. You said, no, we don't have a comprehensive plan leading us into the future. I guess in the political discourse, one side would say we need to go natural gas. The other side says we must go much more in renewables. That's the essence of it.
That what you just said is the greatest argument of why we need a comprehensive approach. Because all right, so on what basis do we make either claim?
Yes. Okay.
right? It has to be some reason why we want to have natural gas or hydro or
Right.
solar or whatever it is. And so what is that reason?
Yes.
And so the reason has to be is that we are working, we have to be responsible for our future.
Yes.
So working towards a future is what would determine what the plan is and therefore what the policies that follow from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now I mentioned earlier that $6 billion figure,
Yes.
right? Well, that's not a lump sum sitting over there. It is basically, it translates to $4,511 per Mainer.
Yes.
Which means that we, whatever happens actually, whatever the plan is up there, whatever happens, it is going to be our individual decisions that will actually determine what happens. And so, therefore, we need a kind of plan that recognizes the fact that the decision makers are not sitting in Augusta.
Mm-hmm.
They are sitting in your house and my house and everybody else's house, and all we have to do is figure out how to spend that $4,511 each person in a better way.
$6 billion leaving the state. Does solar energy create jobs in the state if we implement it, if we push with it?
Well, yes, solar energy will create, one estimate by the report that what is the name, from Berkeley University, says that the solar energy will actually generate 30,000 jobs.
30,000 jobs, and I think it was like 17,000 installers being able to keep.
Yeah.
It was along that line, and they're not exportable jobs. They're not jobs that are going to go to China. They're not jobs.
No, because
they're here.
That would mean we have to export my roof too.
Yes, right.
I mean, you know.
Right.
And so, also, in general, we know that the solar industry generates more than twice the number of jobs than all the activities related to fossil fuels combined.
Could you say that again, just to emphasize that point?
What I mean is
yes.
is that the solar industry generates more jobs than the drillers and the pipe layers and the shippers of fossil fuel, all of it combined.
Really? Okay. So you visited Vermont?
Yes.
And I believe in the company of one of our senators, one of our state senators.
Yes, and 8 more people.
And 8 more people. And what are they doing in Vermont that's different than here?
Well, a lot. What we basically focused on is to look at their major electric company, Green Mountain Power, because they operate quite differently from our own utilities. Part of it is the reason for it is in part a very imaginative leadership, but the other thing is there are different conditions in Maine.
Different conditions.
Different conditions, which is policy issues. A major one is that in the 1990s, in Maine, through our infinite wisdom, whoever thought of this, decided to disenfranchise our utilities. In other words, they can't generate their own power.
CMP cannot generate its own power.
CMP can't generate, Bangor Hydro can't generate their own power. They were busted apart so that the generators are now independent units. And so what does that mean? It means a lot of things, but one of the most important things, it means that these utilities now, the CMPs of the world, have absolutely no incentive to do anything but to sell power, because that's the only thing they can do. In contrast, Green Mountain Power retained all its own energy generation capacity, and therefore they can take advantage of such things as we discussed, that 10.9% benefit that accrues from solar, for instance, or any energy conservation in Green Mountain Power's territory benefits that company, even though that means it reduces their kilowatt-hour sales, but it saves much more money in maintenance issue of the grid that they don't have to do. And not to mention stabilizing the grid.
Stabilizing the grid.
Stabilizing the grid, which gets into another issue of microgrids and so forth and so on.
Right.
But so that company has a huge advantage over our own. And it's important to say, because this created a situation where it's kind of a us versus them situation when it comes to power companies here. We are not always on the same side of the issue. And in Vermont, they are on the same side.
So for CMP, they can only make money in one particular way, and it almost sets them up against having incentives to be able to have a renewable energy environment. Is that the essence
right?
of
In
what you're saying?
other words, every time somebody like me installs solar power, it basically threatens their bottom line,
right?
Because they don't benefit. Well, actually, they do because of that 10.9 cents.
Right.
But they can't. They have no control over it. Is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Green Mountain Power has control over everything they do. CMP has no control over how many solar systems are. In other words, you know, how can you run a company on the basis of not having control over major issues that affect your bottom line? This is not their fault.
Right. And what are the benefits Vermont has realized because they have traveled that route? And by the way, so is it Mary Powell in
Mary
Vermont?
Powell is the chairman. Yeah.
How long have they been on that trajectory of moving towards what you would say are effective energy policies in Vermont?
Roughly 10 years.
And have they realized results yet from that?
They realized lots of results. For example, over the last 4 years, they have reduced their rates 4 times and became more profitable. And here we are arguing over raising our rates in order to remain profitable. That's a difference. And another difference is that their philosophy is simply that they don't want to be an old-style electric utility. They want to be basically an energy service company. That the idea is to serve the customer.
Right.
And if a customer's interest, therefore, is to live in a more energy efficient house, then that's what they want to help with.
Do they assist? So there's a number of ways the state could incentivize. One would be, so where the federal credit's running out this year? Or almost running out.
Almost.
It's like 10%.
It's going to go down a little bit, but it's going to be around for a few years.
Oh, it's still continuing.
Yes.
Okay, so that's been...
The 30% tax rate you're talking about.
Does Vermont have a state tax incentive?
They do have several incentives.
Yes.
But so does Massachusetts, so does Connecticut, so does every single New England state except Maine.
Right.
The only thing we have is net metering, which, by the way, they all have.
Right.
Also, there is a strong pressure now to eliminate net metering in Maine, whereas Green Mountain Power has actively lobbied to increase net metering. Why? Because they benefit from it. So would our utilities benefit from it.
If they were able to generate power, you're saying?
If it would be easier for them, yes.
Right.
They even generate now, but it's they have no control over it.
Got it. Got it. And what other ways does Vermont incentivize the building of renewable energy in the state?
Well, the main model that Vermont has, I think, which is a huge advantage, is not necessarily just a policy issue. It's a collaborative model.
As opposed to what you pointed out as adversarial.
Right,
here.
adversarial.
Maybe unintentionally, but still it's adversarial.
In other words, well, first of all, Green Mountain Power is the only utility in the world which is a B corporation. That's benefit corporation.
Yes, right.
And that means that they are legally obligated to do social good.
Oh.
Legally, that's the definition of it. So, whereas other corporations, any corporation is legally obligated only one thing, to serve the stock shareholder.
Profit, yeah.
And so, in addition to that, they are legally bound to do social good. So that means automatically the logical thing is to collaborate. So for example, in Green Mountain Power's Innovation Center, which is in itself a wonderful invention that I haven't seen anywhere else, in downtown Rutland, they basically share the space with Efficiency Vermont, and I think it's called Neighbor Works of Western Vermont. They share the building, they constantly collaborate, and they collaborate very importantly, for instance, in financing low-income home improvements, for example, which then, so the money is lent by, in this case, it's lent by the Western, the Neighbor Works,
Right.
but the money can be repaid through your electric bill.
Uh-huh. Right.
So in a way, Green Mountain Power guarantees that loan.
Right. Are you aware if in this 10-year travel down this route of a more collaborative model, has it benefited the business community in Vermont, do you know, or has it benefited jobs? Do you have any data on that?
I don't have any data, but I know that it benefited them because the rates went down.
Yeah.
Not just the average rate, but the industry rate.
Rates went down. Well, that would naturally benefit businesses.
That already, plus the fact is, for example, that in the GMP, so Green Mountain Power headquarters, fully half of the headquarters building is reserved for what he calls inspiration and innovation. And they are routinely asking other businesses to move in there and work with them on innovation. That is, so right now the latest one was a solar company that moved in there, and they are trying to work jointly of how to make things better. That's the kind of thing we need.
Yes. Even though we've said there's ideology, it's not strictly a partisan issue. There are some people who say, for example, may deny climate change. They may say, we just don't believe in that particular model. But, so for example, the governor in North Carolina, I think there's some conservative politicians who have said, we need to have green energy, we need to have solar energy just because it's practical for business, practical for the economy. Is that true? Am I saying that correctly?
As a matter of fact, I can't call his name now, but there is a very conservative state senator in North Carolina.
Spoka?
Yes.
Spoka, yes.
Yeah, Spoka.
Yeah.
Who was actually elected in an anti-solar platform.
Right.
And a lobbyist told him, I'm not going to argue with you, do your own research. And he did. And he said, well, I have to change my mind because we are comparing apples and oranges. If you're talking about a heating system, for instance, that's running on oil, we don't look at how much it costs to install it.
Right.
If we are talking about a solar system that actually runs a heat pump, we're talking about the first cost.
Right.
Well, let's compare. If you want to compare these two systems, you have to look at the total cost of both of them.
Right.
And then it turns out that this hydronic system that with the oil furnace on the basement is probably cost maybe even more than the solar system did.
Yes.
And so he therefore went ahead and walked the walk and said and introduced very pro-solar bills, and one of them did not get passed, and then now he's reintroducing it again. So there are people on both sides of the ideological lines who happen to think, which is ultimately that's what matters. It doesn't matter what your, ancestral ideology is whether you are able to think clearly.
Yes.
And I think this guy is an example.
Yes. So we're already towards the end of part one of what we're doing, but as a percentage of a comprehensive energy plan in Maine, what do you think is doable with solar, say, over the next 10 years as a percentage? If we came into a political alignment and we said, hey, this is our mission in Maine, we're bringing solar online, we're going to implement it as well as we possibly can. If we had that determination, what number comes to mind for you that could be the percentage of energy
of the total?
Yes, of the total.
I would say in the ballpark of 20%.
Wow.
But the major source in the future, I think, will be wind.
Wind will exceed solar.
Absolutely, because we have this. See, even in Vermont, there is wind power, but it's only on the mountaintops, right? They don't have a shore.
Right.
We have this enormous potential of offshore, which is being worked on now by the University of Maine, among other things, as you know.
Yes.
So that is I think, probably 70% of the future supply comes from.
Excellent. All right, so Paul, thank you for coming on the show. We'll be continuing our conversation, of course.
Thank you.
There it is. That's another episode on Spotlight on Seniors. There is going to be a part 2 of this show. Stay tuned.